Washington's Farewell Address, 1796. Friends and citizens, the period for a new election of a citizen to administer the executive government of the United States being not far distant, and the time actually arrived when your thoughts must be employed in designating the person who is to be clothed with that important trust, it appears to me proper, especially as it may conduce to a more distinct expression of the public voice, that I shall now apprise you of the resolution I have formed, to decline being considered among the number out of those of whom a choice is to be made. I beg you at the same time to do me the justice to be assured that this resolution has not been taken without the slight regard to all the considerations appertaining to the relation which binds a dutiful citizen to his country, and that in withdrawing the tender of service, which the silence in my situation might imply, I am influenced by no diminution of zeal for your future interest, no deficiency of grateful respect for your past kindness, but am supported by a full conviction that the step is compatible with both. The acceptance and continuance hither in the office to which your sufferance has twice called me have been a uniform sacrifice of inclination to the opinion of duty and to deference for what appeared to be your desire. I constantly hope that it would have been much earlier in my power, consistently with motives at which I was not at liberty to disregard, to return that retirement from which I had been reluctantly drawn. The strength of my inclination to do this, previous to the last election, has even led to the preparation of an address to declare it to you. But mature reflection on the then perplexed and critical posture of our affairs with foreign nations, and the unanimous advice of persons entitled to my confidence, impelled me to abandon the idea. I rejoice that the state of your concerns, external as well as internal, no longer renders the pursuit of inclination incompatible with the sentiment of duty or propriety. And I am persuaded, whatever partiality may be retained for my services, that, in the present circumstances of our country, you will not disapprove of my determination to retire. The impressions with which I first undertook the arduous trust were explained on the proper occasion. In the discharge of this trust, I will only say that I have, with good intentions, contributed towards the organization and administration of the government the best exhortations of which a very fallible judge was capable, not unconscious to the outset of inferiority of my qualifications, experience in my own eyes, perhaps still more in the eyes of others, has strengthened the motives to diffidence myself. And every day the increasing weight of years admonishes me more and more that the shade of retirement as necessary to me as it will be welcome. Satisfied that if any circumstances have been peculiarly valued to my services, they were temporary, I had the consolation to believe that, while the choice and prudence invite me to quit the political science, patriotism does not forbid it. I am looking forward to the moment which is intended to terminate the career of my public life. My feelings do not permit me to suspend the deep acknowledgment of the debt of gratitude which I owe to my beloved country for the many honors it has conferred upon me, still more for the steadfast confidence with which it has supported me, and for the opportunities I have thence enjoyed of manifesting my inviolable attachment by services faithful and persevering, though in usefulness unequal to my zeal. If benefits have resulted to our country from these services, let it always be remembered to your praise. And as an instructive example in our annals, that under circumstances which the passions, agitated in every direction, were liable to mislead, amidst appearances sometimes dubious, vicissitudes of fortune often discouraging, in situations in which not unfrequently want of success had countenanced the spirit of criticism, the constancy of your support was the essential prop of the efforts, and a guarantee of the plans by which they were effected. Profoundly penetrated with this idea, I shall carry it with me to my grave, a strong incitement to unceasing vows that heaven may continue to you the choicest tokens of its benefits, that your union and brotherly affection may be perpetual, that the free constitution which is the work of your hands may be sacredly maintained, that its administration in every department may be stamped with wisdom and virtue, that in fine, the happiness of the people of these states, under the auspices of liberty, may be complete by so a careful preservation and so prudence a use of this blessing as it will acquire them the glory of recommending it to the applause, the affection and adoption of every nation which is yet a stranger to it. Here perhaps I ought to stop, but a solicitude of your welfare, for which I cannot end with but my life, the apprehension of danger, natural to that solicitude, urge me, on an occasion like the present, to offer you your solemn contemplation, and to recommend to your frequent review some sentiments which are the result of such reflection, of no inconsiderable observation, and which appear to me all important to the permanency of your felicity as a people. These will be offered to you with the more freedom, as you can only see them in disinterested warnings of a parting friend, who can possibly have no personal motive to bias his counsel. Nor can I forget, as an encouragement to it, your indulgent reception of my sentiments on a formal and not dissimilar occasion. Interwoven as is the love of liberty with every ligament of your hearts. No recognition of mine is as necessary to fortify or confirm the attachment. The unity of government which constitutes you one people is now very dear to you. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquillity at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. But it is as easy to foresee that, from different causes, as from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth. But it is this point in your political fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be most constantly actively, though oftenly covert and inspiciously directed. It is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your natural union to enemies, to your collective and individual happiness. You will so cherish a cordial, habitual, immovable attachment to it, accustoming yourselves to think and speak of it as a palladium of your political safety and prosperity, watching for it your preservation and jealous anxiety, discountenancing whatever may suggest even a suspicion that in any event can be abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. For this you have every inducement of sympathy and interest. Citizens, by birth or choice, of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affection. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism, more than any appellation derived from the local discriminations. With slight shades of difference, you have the same religion, manners, habitats, and political principles. You have in a common cause fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils, and joint efforts of common dangers, sufferings, and successes. But these considerations, however powerfully they address themselves to your sensibility, are greatly outweighed by those which apply more immediately to your interest. Here every portion of our country finds the most commanding motives for carefully guarding and preserving the union of a whole. The North, in unrestrained intercourse with the South, protected by the equal laws of common government, finds in the production of the latter great additional resources of the mature mine and commercial enterprise and precious materials of manufacturing industry. The South, in the same intercourse, benefiting by the agency of the North, sees its agriculture grow and its commerce expand. Turning partly into its own channels, the seamen of the North, it finds its particular navigation invigorated, and while it contributes in different ways to nourish and increase the general mass of the national navigation, it looks forward to the protection of a maritime support, to which itself is unequally adapted. The East, in an intercourse like the West, already finds in the progressive improvement of the interior communications by land and water, will more and more find a valuable vent for the commodities which it brings from abroad, or manufactures at home. The West derives from East supplies requisite to its growth and comfort, and what is perhaps of still greater consequence, of it must of necessity owe the secure enjoyment of its indispensable outlets for its own production for the weight, influence, and the future maritime strength of the Atlantic side of the Union, directed by indissoluble community of interest in as one nation. As any tenure by which the West can hold its essential advantage, whether derived from its own separate strength or from an apostolate and a natural connection with any foreign power, must be intrinsically precautious. While then every part of our country thus feels an immediate and particular interest in union, all the parts combined cannot fail to find in the united mass of means and efforts greater strength, greater resources, proportionally greater strength from eternal danger, a less frequent interruption of their peace by foreign nations, and is what of inestimable value, they must derive from the Union an exemption of those which broils and wars between them, which so frequently afflict neighboring countries not tied together by the same governments, which their own rival ships alone would be sufficient to produce, from which opposite foreign alliances, attachments, and intrigues would stimulate and embitter. Hence, likewise, they avoid the necessity of those overgrown military establishments which, under any form of government, are inauspicious to liberty, and which are to be regarded as particularly hostile to republican liberty. In this sense, it is as though your own union ought to be considered as the main prop of your liberty, and that love of one another to endear you to the preservation of the other. These considerations speak a persuasive language to every reflecting and virtuous mind, and to exhibit the continuance of the Union as a primary objective of patriotic desire. Is there any doubt whether common government can embrace so large a sphere? Let experience solve it. To listen to mere speculation in a case were criminal. We are authorized to hope in a proper organization of the whole, with the auxiliary agency of governments for the respective subdivisions, will afford a happy issue to this experiment. It is well worth the fair and full experiment. With such powerful and obvious motives of union, affecting all parts of our country, while experience shall not have demonstrated its impracticability, there will always be more reason to distrust the patriotism of those who, in any quarter, may endeavor to weaken its bands. In contemplating the causes which may disturb our union, it occurs as a matter of serious concern that any ground should have been furnished for characterizing parties by geographical discriminations, northern and southern, Atlantic and western. Hence, designing men may endeavor to excite a belief that there is a real difference of local interests and views. One of the heartburnings which sprung from these misrepresentations, they tend to render aliens to each other those who ought to be bound together by fraternal affection. The inhabitants of our western country have lately been a useful lesson on the head. They have seen, in negotiating by the executive, in the unanimous ratification by the Senate of the treaty with Spain, and in the universal satisfaction at the event throughout the United States, a decisive proof how unfounded were the suspicions propagated among them of a policy in the general government and the Atlantic states unfriendly to desires in regard to the Mississippi. They have been witnesses to the formation of the two treaties, that with Great Britain and that with Spain, which secure them to everything they could desire, in respect to our foreign nations, towards confirming their prosperity. Will it not be their wisdom to rely on the preservation of these advantages on the Union by which they procured? Will they not henceforth be deaf to those advisers, if such there are, who would be their server from them, their brethren, and connect them with their allies? To the efficacy and permanency of your union, a government for the whole is indispensable. No alliance, however strict, between these parts can be an adequate substitute. They must inevitably experience the infractions and interruptions which all alliances and times have experienced. Sensible of this momentous truth, you have improved upon your first essay, by the adoption of a constitution of government better calculated than your former for an intimate union, and for the efficacious management of your common concerns. This government, the offspring of our own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted upon full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles, and the distribution of its powers, security with energy, and containing within itself a provision for its own amendment, has a just claim for your confidence and your support. Respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, its measures, which any time exist, till changed by an explicit and authentic act of its whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of its power and right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. All obstructions to the execution of the laws, all combinations and associations, whether possible character, with the real design to direct, control, counteract, or all the regular deliberation and action of the constituted authorities, are destructive of this fundamental principle of fatal tendency. They serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force, to put it in the place of the delegated will of the nation, the will of a party, often of a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community, and according to the alternate triumphs of different parties, to make the public administration the minor of the ill-concerted and incongruous projects of faction, rather than the organ of consistent and wholesome plans digested by the common councils and modified by the mutual interests. However, combinations or associations of all the above description may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines, by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be able to subvert the power of the people, to usurp themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Towards the preservation of your government and the permanency of your present happy state, it is requisite not only that you steadily discountenance irregular oppositions to its acknowledged authority, but also that you resist with care the spirit of innovation upon its principles. However, the pretexts, one method of assault may be to effect in the forms of the Constitution alterations in which will impair the energy of a system, and thus to undermine what cannot be directly overthrown. In all the changes to which you may be invited, remember that the time and habitat are at least as necessary to fix the true character of the governments as of any human institutions, that experience and the surest standard by which to test the real tendency of the existing constitution of a country. That facility in changes upon the credit of a mere hypothesis and opinion exposes to perpetual change from the endless variety of hypothesis and opinion. And remember especially that for the efficient management of your own common interest in a country so extensive as ours, a government of as much vigor as is consistent with the perfect security of liberty is indispensable. Liberty itself will find in such a government with powers properly distributed and adjusted its surest guardian. It is indeed little else than a name, but the government is too feeble to withstand the enterprise of the faction, to confine each member of society within the limits prescribed by the laws, and to maintain all in secure and tranquil enjoyment of the rights of person and property. I have already intimated to you the dangers of parties in the state, which particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensible view, and warn you in the most seldom manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of a party generally. The spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes of government, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed. But in those of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest ranks, and it's truly the worst enemy. The ultimate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, in which different ages and countries have perpetuated the most horrid enormities, in itself is a frightful disposition. But this spirit lengthened into a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and response is the absolute power of individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than its competitors, turns its deposition to the purposes of its own evolution, to the ruins of public liberty. Without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. It kindles the animosities of one part against another, which foments occasionally riots and insurrection. It opens the doors to foreign influence and corruption, which finds a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Thus the policy and the will of one country are subjected to the policy and will of another. There is an opinion that policies in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of the government and serve to keep the spirit alive of the spirit of liberty. This, within certain limits, is probably true, and in governments of a monarchical caste, patriotism may look with indulgence, if not with favor, upon the spirit of party. But in those of popular character and governments purely effective, it is not a spirit to be encouraged. From their natural tendency, it is certain there will always be enough of that spirit of every solitary purpose, and there will be constant danger of excess. The effort ought to be by the force of public opinion to mitigate and assuage it. A fire not to be quenched. It demands a uniform vigilance to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest, instead of warming, it should consume. It is important likewise that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration, to confine themselves with their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of powers of one department to encroach upon another. The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate powers of the departments into one, thus to create whatever form of government a real deposition, a just estimate of that love of power, that proneness to abuse it, which predominates in the human heart. It is sufficient to satisfy us of the truth of this position. The necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power, by dividing and distributing it into different depositaries, and constituting each a guardian of the public weal against evasions by the others, has been evinced by experiments ancient and modern, some of them in our country and under our own eyes. To preserve them must be necessary as to institute them. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by amendment in the way in which the Constitution delegates. Let there be no change by usurpation, for this in one instance may be the instrument of good. It is the customary weapon by which the free governments are destroyed. The precedent must always be greatly overbalanced in permanent evil at any partial transient belief, which the use can be at any time yield. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would men claim in the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politicians, equally with the pious men, ought to respect and to cherish them. A volume cannot trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life? If the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in the courts of justice, and let us with the caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion, whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on the minds of peculiar structure. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that the national morality can prevail in exclusion of the religious principle. It is substantially true that virtue and morality is necessary to spring of popular government. The rule indeed extends with more or less force to every species of free government. Who is that is a sincere friend to it can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric. Promote then as an object of primary importance institutions for the grateful diffusion of knowledge. In proportion as the structure of government gives force to public opinion, it is essential that public opinion should be enlightened. As an important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense by cultivating peace, but remembering that also timely disbursements to prepare for danger frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repel it, avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, by not only shunning occasions of expense, but by vigorous exertion in the time of peace to discharge the debts which unavoidable wars may have occasioned, but not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden which we ourselves ought to bear. The execution of these maxims belong to your representatives, but it is necessary that public opinion should cooperate. To facilitate them the performance of their duty, it is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the payment of debts there must be revenue, there must be taxes, that no taxes can be devised which they are not more or less inconvenient and unpleasant, that the intrinsic embarrassment is inseparable from the selection of the proper objects, which is always a choice of difficulties, ought to be a decisive motive for a candid construction of the conduct of the government in making it, and for a spirit of acquiescence in the measures for obtaining revenue, which the government exigencies may at any time dictate. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct. It can be it that good policy does not equally enjoin it. It will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and no distant period, a great nation to give mankind the magnanimous and too novel example of a people always guided by exalted justice and benevolence. Who can doubt that in the course of time and things, the fruit of such a plan would richly repay any temporary advantages which may be lost by steady adherence to it? Can it be Providence that has not connected the permanent felicity of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at least, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature. At last, it is rendered impossible by its voices. The execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than the permanent, invertible antipathies against particular nations. The passionate attachments for others should be excluded, and that in place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another habitual hatred or habitual fondness in some degree a slave. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duties and interests. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay a hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental trifling occasions of dispute occur. Hence frequent collisions, obstinate and vehement and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels the war to government, contrary to the best calculations of possible. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity, and adopts full passion what reason would reject. At sometimes maketh the animosity of the nation subservient to the projects of hostility, instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister pernicious motives. The peace often, sometimes perhaps the liberty of nations has been the victim. So likewise a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favored nation facilitating the illusion of an imagined common interest in cases where no common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of another, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter without adequate inducement or justification. It leads to also the concessions to the favored nation of privileges denied to others, which is aptly doubly to injure the nation making it the concessions, by unnecessarily parting with that ought to be retained, and by exciting jealousy, ill will, and disposition to retaliate in the parties from whom unequal privileges are withheld. And it gives the ambitious, corrupted, or deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favored nation facility to betray or sacrifice the interests of their own country without odium, sometimes even without popularity, gilding with the appearances of a virtuous sense of obligation, a commendable deference for public opinion, or a laudable zeal for the public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, or infatuation. As avenues to foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightening and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinions, to influence or awe the public councils? Such an attachment of a smaller weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be satellite of the latter. Against the insidious vials of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experiment prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of republican government, but that jealousy to be useful and impartial, else to be the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of a defense against it. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another cause those whom to be acuate to the danger of only one side, to serve to veil and second the acts of the arts of influence over the other. Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, whilst tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. The great rule of conduct for us to regard in foreign nations is extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfectly good faith. Here let us stop. Europe has a primary interest to which none of us have, or a very remote relation. Hence she must be engaged in frequent controversies. The cause of these are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics, or in the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friendships or enmities. Our detachment and distance situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. If we remain one people under an efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance. When we may take such an attitude as will cause neutrality, we may at any time resolve upon the scrupulous respected when bel intelligence nations, under the impossibility of making acquisitions among us, will not the lightly hazard the giving us proclamation, when we may choose peace or war, as our interests guided by justice shall counsel. Why forego the advantages of such a peculiar situation? Why quit our own to stand against foreign ground? Why, by intervening our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. So far, I mean, we are not at liberty to do it. For let me not be misunderstood and capable of patronizing infidelity to existing engagement. I hold the maxim no less applicable to the public than to private affairs, that honesty is the best policy. I repeat it. Therefore, let the engagements be observed in their genuine sense. But my opinion, and it's necessary, would be unwise to extend them. Taking care always to keep ourselves suitable establishments on our respectable defensive posture, we may safely trust to our temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. Harmony, liberal intercourse with all nations are recommended by policy, humanity, and interest. But even our commercial policy should not hold an equal and impartial hand, neither seeking nor granting exclusive favors or preferences, consulting the natural course of things, diffusing and diversifying by gentle means the statements of commerce, but forcing nothing, establishing with power so disposed in order to give trade a stable course, to define the rights of our merchants, and to establish the government to support them. Conventional rules of intercourse, the best that present circumstances and mutual opinion will permit, but temporary, liable from time to time, abandoned or varied, as experience and circumstances shall dictate, constantly keeping in view that it is folly in one nation to look for disinterested favors from another, that it must pay with a portion of independence for whatever it may accept under that character, that in such acceptance it may place itself in the condition of having given equivalents for nominal favors, and yet being reproached and with ingratitude for not giving more. There can be no greater error than to expect or calculate upon real favors from nation to nation. It is an illusion which experience must cure, which with just pride ought to discard. In my offerings to you, my countrymen, these counsels of an old and affectionate friend, I dare not hope that they will make the strongest and lasting impression I could wish. That they will not control the usual concurrent of passion, to prevent our nation from running the course which hitherto marked the destiny of nations. But if I may even flatter myself that they give productive of some partial benefit, some occasional good, that they may now and then recur to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism, this hope may be a full recompense for the solicitude of your welfare, from which they have been dictated. How far in the discharge of my official duties I have been guided by the principles which have been delineated by the public records and other evidences of my conduct must witness to you and the world. To myself the assurance of my own conscience is, that I have believed myself to be guided by them. In relation to the subsisting war in Europe, my proclamation of the 22nd of April 1793 is the index of my plan. Sanctioned by your approving voice, and that by your representative in both houses of Congress, the spirit that measure has continually governed in me, uninfluenced by any attempts to deter or derive it from me. After deliberate examination with the aid of the best light I could obtain, I am well satisfied that our country, under any circumstances of this case, had a right to take, and was bound in duty and interest to take, a neutral position. Having taken it, I determined, as far as should depend upon me, to maintain it with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. The considerations which might, with respect the right to hold this conduct, it is not necessary on this occasion to detail. I will only observe, according to my understanding of the matter, that right, so far from being denied any of the belligerent powers, has been virtually admitted by all. The duty of holding a neutral conduct may be inferred, without anything more, from the obligation which justice and humanity impose on every nation, in cases in which it is free to act, to maintain and inviolate the relations of peace and amity towards other nations. The inducement of interest for your observing that conduct will be best referred to your own reflections and experience. With me, a predominant motive has been to endeavor to gain time for my country, to settle and mature its yet institutions, and to progress it without interruption that degree of strength and inconsistency which is necessary to give it, humanly speaking, the command of its own fortunes. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my own defects to not think it probable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever that may be, I reverently beseech that the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils to which they may tend. I should also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service and upright zeal, the faults of my incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be the manifest of rest. Relying on its kindness as in this other things, and actuated by the fervent love towards it, which is so natural to a man who views it in the native soil of himself and his progenitors for several generations, I anticipate with this pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promised myself to realize, without alloy, the sweet enjoyment of partaking, in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws, under a free government, that ever favorite subject of my heart, and the reward, as I trust, in our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. George Washington.